Hello, Durud and Shalom. Hi, everyone. Wow, I see. Okay, great. Fantastic. I see my favorite people in the chat. So let's just get started. Let me know how the audio is. Let me know if you have liked the stream. Thank you if you have. Guys, I'm actually really happy that you guys enjoyed the last one I did. So I'm going to do more of these. Let me know if you actually like me doing these because today I have some new beautiful slides which I'm going to use to explain to you how modern Islamic political movements formed their ideology. Last time we talked about the geographical elements of it. Today, we're going to talk about the mental motivations behind creating a resistance movement and resistance against what? And how did this all start? And guys, we're talking about modern political Islamic movements. Okay. So let's just get started. Guys, I really like these topics. So, when I study these things, I feel like it's not as much fun to just study these things without coming here and sharing it with you guys. So I really appreciate you guys being here and giving me the chance to just go and give you all the cool stuff that I study and share it with you guys. It's just more fun. All right, so let's look at this. So, and guys, we're trying to really dig deep into the psychology of this. Okay, the loss of an identity, the inferiority complex, the mental the wound. It's actually in the title, the colonial wound and the Islamic response. Perfect title, right? Look at that. Interesting. Thanks, Armin. Love these talks. Oh, thank you, guys. All right, so let's get started. So the colonial wound and the Islamic response, how the specter of imperialism forged modern political Islam. Okay, let's go. Let's go. All right. So, guys, by the way, if you understand this topic, let me know in the chat if there's any part that is complicated so I could make it more simple, because if you understand this, then everything else that we do after this is going to make a lot of sense, because you're going to be able to see everything from this perspective. And I ask you to do something for me today, and I know it might be difficult, but please try to put your mind in the position, try to see things, even though it might be difficult, from the perspective of the Islamists. Okay, guys, if you want to defeat your enemy, you have to understand your enemy. You have to be able to put yourself in their shoes. Okay, just dismissing them as a bunch of ignorant barbarians that are crazy is underestimating your enemy and not truly investing in understanding them, and that's how we lose. So today I'm going to tell you a lot of things from the perspective of Islamists, and I want you to try to somehow relate with it a little bit. I know it's difficult, but I want you just so that you could understand what's happening here. Do you think you could do that? Do you think you could do that today? Or is that too difficult? Is that too icky? All right, let me know in the chat. So to understand modern political Islam, we must first understand the trauma of colonialism. Ooh. By the way, guys, today when I talk about colonialism has been often used as something negative, imperialism or colonialism. And I know they're different, but today we're using them interchangeably. Okay, we're using them interchangeably today, but I know there's slight differences. Okay, but don't be too nitpicky today. Okay, we're trying to be simple right now, right? And both words, colonialism and imperialism, they're supposed to be something negative. Okay, but I'm here to also tell you that they're not necessarily negative. They're not necessarily negative. Imperialism was a good thing. Have you guys heard that before? Is that like kind of weird or new to you guys? Right? So the reason why imperialism was a good thing was because that was the world order. That's what made the world work. That's what made civilization work. So it's, it's very, you have to be very ungrateful to imperialism uh, if you ignore the fact of what it contributed to human civilization. Imperialism and colonialism both were forces of good. However, their time is up. Okay, like they are now, it's past their expiry date. We are now in the age of nation states. Okay, so imperialism was the proper way to do things at some point in time, and colonialism, right? You had only three options before the invention of the nation state model. I mean, the nation state model was invented exactly when it was needed. Okay, it's historic determinism, whatever. But before that, the imperial model was the correct model. You were either an empire, or you were a colony of an empire, or you were a barbarian. You were one of the barbarians. Okay, so between, if you weren't an empire yourself, between being a colony or being barbarians, it was always better to be a colony. Okay, the empire brought you stability. The empire brought you roads. The empire brought you infrastructure. The empire brought you a code of law, which is very important. Okay, the empire brought you connection and trade with other areas of the empire. So the empire was good, was a force of good, right? So it's important, but there was a time that the age of empire was supposed to end, and the age of nation states were starting. And during that time, we had people who were the revolutionaries, who were basically anti-colonial and anti-empire. They were, their narratives and their literature was so anti-imperial, anti-colonial, and they have created identities, especially more leftist identities, that have that which was right for its time to be an anti-imperial, anti-colonial, but it was also dismissing how good all of this was before the anti-imperial revolutions were necessary. So the reason why I say all that is because I want you to understand that if in the text that we're going to be reading and looking at on these slides, if it's describing colonialism, because we're so used to Islamic and leftist language about colonialism, you might think that I'm saying something negative, but I'm not. This is descriptive. It's not normative. It's descriptive. Okay? So again, let's go to understand the modern political Islam, we must first understand the trauma of colonialism. The rise of Islamist movements in the 19th and 20th centuries was not an isolated religious phenomenon. This is very important because a lot of times, especially us, anti-Islamic activists, we tend to want to reduce everything to Islamic scripture and ignore every other factor. And then there are some other people on the other side that want to completely dismiss the role of Islam and just only highlights anything that has nothing to do with Islam as the factors. However, much like many things in life, things are multifactorial. The Islamic element is key in all of this happening. However, you can't reduce it into Islam. You have to understand the political climate at that time and the 19th and 20th centuries and the role of colonialism and European. So it was a direct socio-political response to European colonial domination, right? In this presentation, we're going to explore how the memory of a united Muslim world, or ummah, this is a word that we're going to keep coming back to again and again and again and again during these series. Okay, the memory of a united Muslim world, or ummah, was shattered by colonialism and then reforged in a powerful ideology of resistance and decolonization. So let's examine that. And I also tell you why some of these narratives work, but don't make any sense, but they work anyways, right? So let's continue. How is this so far? Everything understandable? Everything understandable so far? Let me know. So, guys, every time we say pan-Islamist, just remember pan is just like when we said pan-Arabist. Pan-Arabist means that creating a bloc, a political bloc, where while Arab being Arab is the unifying factor. Okay, that's what pan-Arabism means. So pan-Islamism means that creating a political bloc like a ummah governed by a caliphate that what unites everyone together, what brings anyone together as a unit, is them being Muslim. So that's what pan-Islamism is. And every single modern Islamic movement that we have is a subcategory of pan-Islamism. So Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the IRGC, the Islamic Republic, the 1979 Islamic Revolution. These are all pan-Islamic movements. I mean, the Shia ones. So both the Shia and Sunni, they want to unite the Ummah. So the Sunni wants to have a caliphate leading the Ummah. The Shia wants to have an imamate leading the Ummah. So far, so good? Okay, good. Let's continue. So pan-Islamists assert that a united Muslim Ummah was systematically dismantled by colonial power. And this gets right into the heart of it. Their understanding is that the reason why we lost our empire, our Islamic empire, or as they call it, is the caliphate, is because colonial powers came and destroyed it. So the core assertion is that a cohesive Muslim world, politically, before we get there, let me actually try to make you understand the pain, the trauma. See if you could relate to it. I mean, here's what I did on the Persian channel. I tried to make Iranians understand what this trauma is by telling them how much Iranians, for example, have the pain, the trauma of losing the glory of the Persian Empire, or something even more close to them, something that they remember even more, is losing the Pahlavi Iran under the Pahlavi dynasty, and how much Iran was progressing, and how great things were during the Pahlavi. So the fact that the 1979 Islamic Revolution was a trauma to the Iranian people, and a feeling of lost identity and previous glory, and that trauma is something that I try to explain to people. I mean, if you're Jewish, for example, you might understand that Jews, for 2,000 years, Jews had this idea that they want to go back to Israel. They want to bring back their nation. They used to have their own nation at some point, and now they lost it. And, every year they sang next year in Jerusalem. And eventually it worked, actually, surprisingly for them. They managed to make it work out. And they went back to something even better than they had before. So, but that doesn't usually happen. Usually you don't go back. So Jews somehow manage to make it work out. But usually once you lose something, you lose it. And Iranians are trying to also go back to what they had before. Maybe not as far as the Achaemenid or the Sassanid Empire, but as far as the Pahlavi dynasty, that would be nice. Okay, so this is the same thing that Muslims are feeling. They feel like they used to be kings. Okay, they're like we were kings, and now they're not kings. Okay, so they used to be powerful. They used to be glorious. They used to have an empire, and they used to be the center of the world's poetry, science, philosophy, trade, technology, all of that stuff. But now they're nothing. They're pathetically weak. When they were in power, Europe was going. They say that Europe was going through the dark ages. Now everything has flipped, and why they're high and we're so low. So this is bad. So we want to. The idea is that what happened what happened is that we were united, and now we're not. The Ummah, the global Islamic community, is fighting amongst each other. And so what was it that we had that we do not have right now? What was it that we had before that we do not have right now? It was unity. I mean, they think that honestly they never had unity, but their narrative is that we had unity. We were a united Ummah, united Muslim community, and now we're not. So if we could somehow manage to get that unity, we will go back. We will go back to being powerful and ruling again, right? So the core assertion is that a cohesive Muslim world, politically embodied by the Caliphate model, lost its power and coherence under the pressure of European expansion. So, guys, by the way, we are keep repeating two words here: Ummah and Caliphate. So, the way to understand this, Ummah and Caliphate is kind of like nation and state, right? So the Ummah is something resembling a nation, and the Caliphate is something resembling a state. Okay, not the same thing, but resembling. We got a super chat. Let me actually look at a super chat saying the myth of Jews. Jews never left, but the elites did. Yeah, I'm just talking about what the narratives are. So you're just describing what the narratives are and what the emotions, the emotions based on those narratives, right? So, for example, over here, for example, there's a myth of unity. Like I'm saying, like the Muslim believe that they used to be united and now they're not, and that's why they are weak. And that's why they lost the caliphate. But honestly, they were never united. So this is also a myth. This is also a myth here, right? The idea is that an ummah without a caliphate is like a body without a head. Okay, so this is to and the ummah for the ummah to be able to rediscover his head, it needs to be united. So this narrative of lost unity, quote unquote lost unity, became a defensive mechanism and a rallying cry against colonial ascendants. By the way, guys, when you say defense mechanism, it's both. There's three defensive mechanisms that is happening here at the same time. There's one military one, like a armed one, right? There's a narrative war. So and then there's a psychological defensive mechanism that is happening within every Muslim. Okay, because remember, this is a mental. This could be considered a mental disorder, and I'm not trying to be insulting here. I'm actually being describing here because um, it, you have to understand that if you, especially as a Sunni Muslim, the Sunni Islamic world saw its identity as the ones who win, as the ones who have the might of Allah on their side, and they dominate, they invade, they crush their enemies. That is part of the Islamic identity, especially if you're Sunni. So when the Ottoman Empire falls and you lose your caliphate, and then you see Western countries becoming more and more powerful and ahead of you in everything, that causes an inferiority complex. And because this level of inferiority doesn't match the narratives about your identity, that causes a lot of anxiety and, well, I don't know if anxiety is the right word, but it causes a lot of mental, stress, and also a lot of desire for revenge. Okay, so remember, this defense against the West is not just for the sake of um, bringing back the Islamic Caliphate. It's also for punishing the West for being the cause of it falling to begin with, right? Let me see. We got another super chat. Thank you guys for the super chat. Let me know if this is helpful. Saying the super chat says caliphs like Pope, but lose political power, but the caliphs are out. I don't know what you mean. Caliphs are not like Pope. Caliphs are a little bit less involved in religion. Well, not a little bit. They're a lot less involved in deciding religious doctrine compared to the Pope. The Caliph is separate from the ulama. The ulama were more involved in the religious affairs than the caliphs themselves, if I understood your super chat correctly, right? So let's go here. All right, so say by 1914, European colonialism had subjugated 85% of the planet. This is very interesting because this was their peak, and I think nobody like among European colonialists, the British at this time managed to have the greatest amount of land colonized compared to any other empire that came before them, right? But but also very soon after their peak, the empire fell apart. I mean, kind of organically, the European empires were they themselves were um voluntarily leaving the idea of being an empire, right? And here's an interesting thing to think about, right? So the Islamists consider that they're fighting imperialism, right? Um, but well, actually, we'll circle back to this. Okay, there's a contradiction in the idea of Islamists fighting imperialism. Okay, but we'll come back to this. Just think about what that. There's an irony there. Actually, let me say it like think what the irony is, and then I'll tell you what it is when we get to it. Okay, so but this is basically, you can see that the dominating force, the European model, the idea of the nation state model, compared to the imperial model, is working, but it's for Europeans, they're kind of half in between, right? So before the Europeans were this influential, right? The everything was either the world order was empire, right? The colonial model. However, the latest empires, which were the European empires, were very successful in covering more landmass. However, they also had this thing with them that was going to cause the end of their own empire. Which what was it? It was basically their own ideas. So the European empires brought their rule over all of these lands, okay, outside of Europe. However, it also brought a whole bunch of European ideas, which includes ideas of self-determination under the model of a nation state. So what the Europeans did is they ruled over these lands, but they also exported the very ideas that eventually caused them to no longer be an empire, right? So the people who Europeans were ruling over, they were being impacted by the culture and the ideas that were coming out of Europe, and some of them were the ideas of determination and also nation state. Okay, so Europe exported the very ideas that ended their empire, because a lot of people kind of like those ideas, right? The very ideas that came out of Europe, people were like, "Oh, that thing you have there, that nation state model, that looks pretty nice. Can we have some of those?" It's interesting because there was a lot of nationalistic movements that rose in the Middle East, which is a topic for another time. But a lot of time people want to act like the Islamists act like this was forced on them. But there was also, I mean, it was technically forced on them as well, because they drew the lines for the borders of these new nation states. But at the same time, there was many groups of people there that kind of wanted that. They're like, yeah, this is actually nice. We do want to be nation states, right? So, but I'll tell you why the Islamists' narrative about all of this doesn't make any sense, right? So it says this was not a regional conflict, but a global transformation. The Muslim world was enveloped in a system of colonies, protectorates, dominions, and commonwealths. Scholar Peter Mandeville identifies pan-Islamism as a direct anti-colonial discourse born from this reality of near total Western domination. So let me actually just say what the irony here is right now. Okay, the anti-colonial narrative between pan-Islamism is kind of hypocritical, because Islam is imperial, right? Islam is imperial. So when they say we're anti-colonial, what do you mean? If you look at the expansion of the Islamic world, it was an imperial project. Like how the hell, like how did the Islamic world expand? It expanded through conquest and forcing the will of the rule of the empire upon any land that they managed to capture. So when they say that, how did pan-Islamism turn into an anti-colonial discourse? Well, because they act like if you read their literature, it seems like they're just anti-imperial by principle as a whole, even though if you read the Quran and the Hadith, you don't see any anti-imperial narratives within the Quran and Hadith. In fact, if you read the Quran and the Hadith, you see that it's actually very much imperial. Okay, I mean, they don't call it imperial, they call it the Caliphate, but the Caliphate is an empire. The Caliphate is an empire. Okay, by any definition of an empire will make the Caliphate also an empire, right? So by by the definition of empire, if you read the Quran and Hadith, Islam is an imperial project. So where did this come from? The idea that pan-Islamism is anti-colonial discourse. Well, the discourse is because we lost our empire, so we are no longer an empire, and our enemy is an empire, so we get to be anti-imperial. Even though that doesn't really reflect your scripture, right? And they are anti-imperial. I mean, technically, if they want to be accurate, they should be like, we're anti-Western imperialism and we're pro-Islamic imperialism. If they were honest, if they were informed and honest, this is how they would be. This is how they would be saying it. We're anti-Western imperialism, and we're anti-Islam. We are pro-Islamic imperialism. Okay, that's how they would say it. But because that's not how they say it, and they just act like they're just anti-colonial at all completely, this whole anti-colonial narrative gets copied from the other anti-imperial movement at that time, which are the communists, right? Which are the commies. This is where the Red-Green Alliance comes from. If you guys wondering, and this comes from all the way back, in 1916 and after, ever since the Sykes-Picot Agreement and everything, right? You see the merger between leftism and Islamism happens right around this time because of the shared enemy that they have, which is Western powers, right? So because all of a sudden, and this is why this types of political Islamic movements is modern, because throughout Islamic history you don't see any anti-imperial narrative, but now you see it because it's a reactionary movement to European colonial powers, and because there's two forces in the world that are anti-Western imperialism, one communism and the other one Islamism. You could see why all of a sudden their literature, their narratives, they start copying each other's homework, and they also all of a sudden they get united in so many ways. And you can see why so many Islamic thinkers become socialist and vice versa, actually, right? So this is how that happens, right? Yeah. Is this by the way, guys, is this understandable? Like, I'm really enjoying talking about this. I don't know if you guys are understanding it, and if it's interesting, let me know in the chat, because I get a lot of energy from you guys in the chat. If you guys tell me like, yeah, okay, this is pretty cool. This is pretty cool, Armin. I'm learning a lot. Or like, if you say, I've never thought about it that way, or if you say like, oh my God, I didn't know that. Okay, if you guys say that, then I feel like I'm doing something. Okay, good. Unicorn is saying yes, very, very interesting. Okay, good. All right, fantastic. Unicorn is appreciating what I'm saying. All right, so gets even more interesting. This is where it gets even more interesting, right? So it's a colonial domination was not just military, it was a project of intellectual subjugation. Okay, based on the Islamists. This is speaking from the perspective of the Islamists, right? This is very interesting. So the way think about it this way. Um, if you want to be anti-imperialist, and the it's really hard to continue being anti-imperialist once the European powers stop being imperialists, right? So remember, the European powers around this time were kind of in between being empires and being nation states. Like they had the nation states model for themselves, but they were being colonialists for other areas, but they were also slowly giving other countries their own countries, even though they were still being very influential there. So they were basically they were kind of in between the two model. Like the European powers at the end of this time, they were like kind of like an empire, but kind of like a nation. Like we were moving away from the idea of this model. Like right now, this model, we don't have this model at all, right? The nation state model is dominant model all around the world. And the only people who want to try to bring back the imperial model are Islamists and Putin. And not even the Chinese want to bring back the imperial model. Okay, those are the only two groups of people who want to bring the imperial model back. Islamists and Putin, right? And but there's a problem for both Islamists and communists thinkers for all of these decades writing about the evils of imperialism and colonialism. It's really hard to now all of a sudden be like, oh, okay, there's no empire anymore, guys, let's go home, pack it up, we're good. No, okay. You have this new identity of being anti-imperial and anti-colonial. We are like, is how many identity crises? How do you make that plural? How many different identity crises can we go through? We can't do that. We can't do that. We need to be we need to remain anti-imperial. This is why words like neo-colonialism or neo-imperialism gets invented, because even though these countries are not colonialist or empires anymore, you still have to pretend like they are. You have to still pretend that they are. And the way you do that is that, like, oh, they're sneaky. They're being sneaky with their imperialism. They're just being literally clever. It's like they're colonizing your mind. Ugh. Like, okay, like, how am I being colonized? We have our own government. We have our own country. How am I being colonized? Like, because they are in your minds. They're like, so if do you believe men and women should have equal rights? Ah, you do. Your mind has been colonized. Okay. Do you believe in secularism? Oh, you've been colonized. Do you believe in individual rights? Do you watch Disney? Okay. Do you listen to American music? Okay. So are you wearing Western? Are you wearing a tie? Okay. Your mind has been colonized, right? So you have been intellectually subjugated. So the idea is that the Western powers have realized that there's a more effective and less costly way to colonize the Islamic world. We don't have to be there and spend so much money on military. We could just have governments that are serving us, and then we go home, and it has the same benefits of being an empire without all the hassle and all the costs. So, for in the minds of a lot of these Islamists, the leaders of Islamic countries, they are basically forces of the West, right? So like the the leaders in Egypt, the Saudi Arabia, the Saudis, the King of Jordan, all of these people in the minds of Islamists, they're puppets of the imperialist West, and therefore we are still being colonized. Okay, just because the guy says he's a Muslim and just because he's an Arab, or whatever, that doesn't make him not a Westerner. Okay, the best way to be a Westerner and rule over you as a Westerner is to not look like a Westerner. So these leaders of Islamic countries are not Islamic at all, right? So that's how we're still being colonized, right? So the idea is that these powers, to justify their rule, and by the way, guys, this is why, to be a proper Islamist, before fighting the West, you have to fight your own government. Okay, this is why Islamists fight the Saudis, fight the King of Jordan, fight the leaders in Egypt, Sisi. Okay, General Sisi. They fight this because these are all Western imperialists, and you have to fight these kuffar even if they say they're Muslim. By the way, I saw we got a super chat. I will read that, but let me just finish the slide. So it says, to justify their rule, colonial powers constructed a framework of superior colonizer and inferior colonized people. Yeah. So the view is that through their propaganda and through their education and through their movies and through their music, they want to show that you suck, you are nothing, you're worthless, so you need us. We are white civilized people. Guys, there's something very sneaky happening about here. Let me know if you notice it. Okay, so the idea is that they are trying to show us that they're superior and we are the inferior ones to justify ruling over us. So for you as a Middle Easterner to think, well, look at us, we're pathetic. We need these great people from the West to come and civilize us and show us the way. So with their education and with their propaganda, they make us feel like worthless, in need of the help of the Western man. And if we think like that, then they could more easily rule over us because they don't even have to force us. We will just invite them to rule over us, right? That's the idea. So it's saying this ideology persisted long after independence was achieved. So even when these countries were independent and they weren't colonies anymore, they were like, nope, we're still being colonized. It's called neo-colonialism or something like that. So they say the so-called civilizing mission was in reality a program of forced westernization or assimilation aimed at supplanting local cultures, language, education, and systems of governance. So let me tell you why this is actually very clever before I go to the super chat. Okay. The reason why this is very clever is because it's a very, very powerful solution to the inferiority complex and the lost collective identity, okay, the humiliation of the collective identity as a Muslim that they experience, right? Meaning that what is the mental pressure that you're feeling here? Okay, what is it? You are a Muslim and you look at the Islamic world and you compare it to the West and you see backwardness and lack of progress in almost everything, right? So what do you do? You could feel like shit, or you could turn this on its head. You could switch it around. How? This is genius. Okay, so you act. This is actually the next slide. Yes. Let me tell you before I tell you how clever this is, let me respond to Shauna's super chat. Shauna saying the concept of decolonization was originally invented by Americans, but was co-opted by the communists. Yes, just like anything that is a classical liberal value, eventually at some point it had huge success. And historically, the commies used the brand power of its success to try to promote their own crap ideas, in the same way that in modern times, woke and progressive leftist ideologies also try to take advantage of the success of many civil rights movement that was based on classical liberal values. They basically take the branding and the vocabulary from it, and then they turn it into something ugly and evil and deformed, but they just use the same language because the classical liberal values are so successful, and they just try to use the brand power of those ideas to justify their own really crappy ideas. That's what happens. So in the same way that communists did that, the woke left is also doing that right now. So let's get back to this superior and inferior thing, and then what the solution is to get out of this mental, stress, pressure that you're facing. Okay, so Edward Said said that Orientalism, his book Orientalism, describes how the West constructed a passive and decadent Orient to define its own superiority. Okay, in a seminal 1978 book, Said revealed how the Occident, created a polarized world against the East, the Orient. This wasn't a neutral description; it was a powerful act of representation, yeah, but by portraying the Orient as irrational, weak, and backwards, the West could frame itself as rational, strong, and progressive, a form of mirroring that justified domination. So this was Edward Said's understanding of this. So the Occident. So yeah, actually, let's go. Yes, so let's also look at the superior inferior situation, and then I'll tell you why the cover, why it's actually quite genius, right? So look, they describe this process of othering, right? They say othering was the process of classifying colonized people as different or non-normal to justify colonial rule. Othering was the conceptualization of human beings classification by which superior colonizers labeled people from colonized lands as people from colonized lands as different or non-normal. That's Allison said that. This process created a clear us versus them binary. The colonizers positioned themselves as the universal norm, and any deviation was a problem to be solved, and underdevelopment was a condition that we, the civilized, were uniquely equipped to address. This self-congratulatory attitude was the core justification for the civilizing mission. So this is the narrative that you hear both commies at that time having, and also Islamists at that time having. Okay. The interesting thing about all of this, especially when coming from Islamists, is that the idea that we're better and we're superior and other people suck and they need us was what Islamists did for 1300 years. Especially Sunni Muslims. Shia Muslims, not as much. But Sunni Muslims, their idea was that we are better, we're superior, Muslims are superior, non-Muslims are inferior, they're uncivilized, we will crush them, they're pathetically weak, we'll take over their territory, and we'll because we know how to be civilized, we'll introduce them to being civilized the Islamic way, which is the only way. That was the Islamic narrative, and that is still the Islamic narrative in the Quran and in the Hadith. So the idea of like, oh, they're otherizing us and making us telling to justify rule over us, that's a very accurate description of the Quran and the Hadith, right? That's perfectly describes how the Quran and Hadith looks at non-Muslims and justifies ruling over them. So, but this is still very clever. You might think like, oh my God, this is so stupid and ignorant and hypocritical, but it's actually very clever, right? And it also shows why so many of these political Islamic movements are quite modern, because what they're doing, they're like, oh, we want to be anti-Western, but this is a Western way of looking at things. This way of framing, this way of blaming people who are self-congratulatory and see themselves as superior, as something negative. They're like, oh, these Westerners are self-congratulatory and consider themselves superior to us. Okay. The thing is, that was the norm for 12,000 years of human civilization. Every group of people that ruled over another naturally saw themselves as superior to the ones they were ruling over. It was only, and obviously many people in the West continued thinking like that. However, the difference is that in the West, for the first time, many people also thought actually, maybe we shouldn't look at it like that. And because there were many thinkers in the West who saw superiority to not be something inherent, at least, these modern movements, including leftist communism, which communism was a modern concept, they were influenced by it. And this impacted Islam. So what I'm saying is that the very idea that these Islamists are using to judge people for considering themselves to be superior was a modern way to judge people as a negative. This was like a bad thing, and that came from the West. However, the reason why this is clever is because now you could feel not so inferior anymore. So if until this point we saw if we are strong and advanced and ahead of people and crushing everybody and defeating them, if that means we're superior and the people who are being crushed under our feet, they're inferior. Well, now that the Europeans have progressed, we could just flip the narrative. They're inferior because they consider themselves superior, which is the bad thing to do apparently now. All of a sudden, it's a bad. The Quran doesn't say that's a bad thing to do. The Hadith doesn't say that's a bad thing to do. But given that it's becoming popular to consider this, especially after World War II with the Nazis, like now everybody could be like, you think you're superior. Oh, I know. I remember somebody else who thought they were superior. So the idea of being superior all of a sudden is taboo and a negative thing. And now, as if you're part of the Islamic world, you could be inferior. You could be now superior for not thinking that. So the West might be more advanced in technology, science, and trade, finance, and everything else. But now they're inferior because of this moral judgment that I just made on them. Oh, you think you're superior? Well, that's bad. And I don't think like that. So I'm good. Right? So now you get to feel good about yourself again. Now you get to be. By the way, this defense mechanism was a defense mechanism that among Muslims, Shias have been using way before Sunnis. Okay? Because Shias were losing all the time. Right? So the Sunnis were the rulers, and the Shias were the pathetically weak ones who had their imams killed left and right. Right? So the Shias were like, so the Sunnis narratives were, oh my God, God must be on our side. Look how powerful we are. Look how much we're crushing everybody. But the Shia narrative was like, oh my God, God must be so on our side because look how wronged we are and look how much people are oppressing us. Right? So the Shias have played this game long before Sunnis. But you see how clever that is, right? You see how you could deal with that mental pressure that you're feeling by just flipping the narrative. Okay, we got another super chat. Thank you, Carl. Carl saying Western Orientalism painted Middle East in a pretty favorable light. West still hasn't grasped the level of its violence and backwardness. Yes, so it did because they were more fair than other people that came before them. But this is the way that these people see what happened. But yeah, I get you what you're saying, Carl. Thank you. So actually, look at this picture, by the way, guys. Look, what are we looking at here? Look at the picture. What is this? Okay. And why is this so glorious? What you're looking at in this picture is the Suez Canal. Okay. So you could be like, you could basically have the war of narratives, but in the objective reality, you could see the superiority of the West displayed physically right in front of your eyes, right? So if there were underdeveloped countries, it was we who could address the problem of underdevelopment, for we are the norm. So that's how they are framing what the Westerners are saying. But the understanding is that you guys couldn't build these stuff. Like, so here's the thing. Obviously, the superiority is not inherent. And a lot of people are sensitive about using the word superior. But guys, some things are superior to others. As long as you don't think that that's inherent within certain group of people, you're right. You're completely right about this, right? I mean, the Middle Eastern societies at the time would never be able to build the Suez Canal. It was only because the Europeans showed up that that was even possible. So this was a blessing. Again, guys, colonialism is good for the areas that are being colonized. On average, it's a net benefit. Is everything about it good? No, I'm pretty sure there are some negatives as well. But it's a net benefit. He's hugely in favor of the benefit. The cost associated with being colonized is so much less than the benefits. There is no way that the Middle Eastern people back in the day would be able to do anything remotely close to building this something like this. Without the Europeans being there, it would be another 100 years for you to have something like this by yourself, right? So, but and again, some people say like we shouldn't call some people inferior. Like, okay, but what if we don't say that is inherent? What if we don't say it's their nature? What if we just say their culture is inferior, or their methods is inferior, or their systems or their institutions are inferior? Can we not call it inferior? And some people are like, okay, Armin, I see what your point is. That might be inferior, but it's just mean to say that to people that your way is inferior or you are being inferior, not inherently, but this is inferior. A lot of people think that is mean, but I think it's an act of kindness, because you shouldn't get butthurt over the fact that you are being your methods are inferior. You should be like, oh my, you should thank people who pointing that out to you, so you could, given that it's not inherent, that means that there's a correcting mechanism that you could apply here, given that it's not inherent, right? But so again, let's go back to the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal became a powerful symbol of the colonial claim that colonialism is civilization. Colonial powers pointed to massive engineering feats like the Suez Canal, built by British and France, uh, as proof of their inherent superiority and the benefits of their presence. I mean, they're not wrong. They're not wrong. The argument was simple and potent. Without the French conquest of Egypt, such monumental achievement would have been impossible. This narrative directly equated technological powers with a moral right to rule, masking. Oh, wait, they are wrong. The only part that is wrong is this inherent part. So, built by British and France as proof of their inherent superiority. So, this inherent, I would take that out. But it is superior. It's just not inherent. I mean, we know it's not inherent because different points in time, different civilizations were ahead. So we know it's not inherent. But it is superior. We cannot deny the superiority. We can't deny the inherent part. Okay. So such a monumental achievement would have been impossible. This narrative directly equated technological powers with a moral right to rule. Oh, here, this is their narrative. Masking the exploitative reality of the colonial project. I mean, it's not masking it if you acknowledge that there are some negative, but the benefits outweigh the cost, then you're not masking it. If you just say it's all rainbows and butterflies and everything was good and there was nothing unfair, then yeah, sure, then you're masking it. But if you accept that, yeah, there's some costs associated with being colonized, but the benefits are more, then you are not masking it. All right, let's go here. Oh, we got a super chat. There's also the major issue found in both Islam and Christianity, which is the idea of abundance being normal and scarcity being abnormal. I've never thought about it that way. I have to think about that. Thank you, Shona. All right. So this is why you all have to understand modern political Islam as a reaction to something huge that happened in the Middle East. Okay. And I think a lot of us don't understand how big of a deal this was because we didn't live through it. But the Europeans' power is just growing so fast, and then that wave of power just coming to the Middle East, it was like a tsunami. It was like, imagine like your everything is working in a certain way, and all of a sudden this powerful godlike entity that is behaving and acting in a way that you can't even recognize, using forces that you're not even familiar with, and just comes like a wave and just changes everything about your way of life, right? That shock, that trauma, the effects of that is still being felt today. Like everything, like if you see the rise of ISIS, Al Qaeda, Hezbollah Tahrir, the Islamic Revolution in 1979, all of and even my mass migration right now to Europe and North America, all of this is a response, is like the shock waves that's it was like that was a huge earthquake, and we're still feeling its effect to this day, right? And this is like a trauma that even as a Muslim, if you haven't experienced you didn't live through trauma, that all of the fall and the attempt to rise again has been put into the narratives and the texts and the literature and the way and their stories and the way they think, the philosophy and the way they look at the world, that the trauma has been handed down through new Muslims, through those stories, through those memes, meme with the original definition of it, not internet memes, through those narratives, uh, from one generation to another, and that's why they inherit that. So all of this is a response, and one key figure in all of this that we will discuss later is Hassan al-Banna, right? So which we'll get back to, but we and then eventually Qutb, and then Khomeini. So these are the three main people that we're going to be studying, and their connection with each other and how they brought this all together. But if you think about all of this as a reaction to this major explosion in the Middle East, like a political explosion in the Middle East, then you will be able to make sense of all of this, right? So let's go through this. In response, political Islam emerged as a call to resistance, leveraging religious principles to end Western domination. According to Mark Hoband, if I'm pronouncing his name right, the formation of Islamist movements was essentially a call to resistance against the colonial West by applying the religious principle deeply embedded in Muslim consciousness. The reconstruction of the Ummah was a direct stance against the Occidental intruders. The anti-colonial struggle was not framed in a uh, in purely secular terms. Instead, it drew upon a deep well of Islamic concepts, codes, and historical memory to mobilize the masses and articulate a vision for a post-colonial future. Yes. This is very powerful stuff. And you can see the core Islamic concepts that are coming here together and connecting. So core Islamic concepts became powerful metaphors for Muslim aspirations to reorder the post-colonial world. You see the caliphate, jihad, sovereignty, decolonization, the Medina model of Prophet Muhammad, the Islamic State. All of this is, so according to Salman Saeed, terms like Caliphate, Ummah, Islamic State, or Medina model are metaphor for the struggle between Muslim aspirations to reorder the post-colonial world. This is, by the way, guys, this is why this is very dangerous. This is why people need to understand that what we're facing is not just a religion, it's a world order attempting to dismantle the world order that we are under today. This is, again, I have to remind everybody that a lot of people think that Islam is a religion. So if it's competing against other religions or lack of religion. And that's not really an accurate way of looking at it. Islam is trying to fight Western colonialism or Western imperialism. That's what they call it. But we know it as basically the new Western world order. So it's not so Islam is not just a religion, it's a world order that is competing with the existing world order. Right now we have three world orders, right? Maybe four, but let's focus on three. The one that is the dominant one all around the world, which is the Western one, with all the nation states. Almost everywhere is now under a nation state, and that came out of the French Revolution and the American Revolution, right? Um, that's the one that is being used. But there's also two competing ones, two other groups of people that are trying to make their world order dominant all around the world, and that's the pan-Islamists and the communists. So the West might have so many other enemies, right? But these are the two ideological enemies that are trying to completely destroy the world order as it is and bring their own. I mean, to be fair to the pan-Islamists, at least they have something to point to. The communists, they don't even know what they want to. The communists are pretty set on destroying the world order, but they're not very clear about what they want to replace it with. At least the Islamists have something to point to, because they at some point they had an order. They're like, okay, we just want to bring what we had before, right? And this is why this is a very dangerous enemy, because everything that you enjoy in life right now, all the stability, all the rights that you have, all the freedoms that you have, all the security that you have, access to clean water, access to food, all the privileges that you have, everything is thanks to this modern world order, the Enlightenment values, classical liberal values, nation state model, modern Republican model, brought to you by America and held by America. This is why they see America to be their main enemy right now, right? I mean, it was mostly the American Revolution more than the French Revolution. The French Revolution was the start, but the American model was the one that actually created what we understand as nation states everywhere around the world today, right? So, given that Islam is a world order that is trying to fight this system that we have, and everything that we have in this world today is thanks to the system, you have to consider these movements as the enemy of not just your way of life, but everyone's way of life, including Muslims living in Islamic countries. Okay, this is a huge, big threat to the world, to the entire planet. Yeah, I know about communist utopia. It's just not very, but it's just that there's nothing that they could point to say like, well, here's what it looks like. It has never been achieved. At least the pan-Islamists, they either point to Muhammad ruling Medina, or they point to the Abbasid dynasty, or I don't know, one of the other empires that they had, and be like, look, that's what we had, that's what we want. Like, what are the communists are going to point to? They have nothing to point to, right? So the goal was not simply to expel colonizers, but to dismantle the entire colonial world order. It's not like, okay, just leave this area and give this land back to us. That's not the goal. The goal is that this sick system, this evil, sick, degenerate system, needs to completely be destroyed. And this is where their sovereignty and anti-colonialism were inseparable. And by the way, by colonialism, they mean Western. It doesn't even matter to these people if you can't convince them that this is not colonialism or imperialism. To them now, anything that is Western is colonialism. And also, when I say Islam is not competing with other religions, you might think like, well, Armin, they are actually competing with atheism and Christianity and Judaism. Yeah, but they are, but they don't see those as things that they're competing with directly. They see all of them as tools of the Western model. These are basically what they're fighting is not Christianity. What they're fighting is not Judaism. What they're fighting is not atheism. What they're fighting is the West, and these are just the different weapons that the West uses. Also, feminism or whatever they don't like. Anything like anything that is non-Islamic, they think that these are just Zionism, for example. Okay, if they think they're fighting Zionism, Zionism is also part of this global order. This is just their. I mean, honestly, these days it's now more trendy to say that everything is being controlled by Zionism, including the West. But the other way around is that the West is controlling everything and Zionism is the tool. So you have to pick, you have to choose. If you hate is Zionism controlling everything and the West is part of their puppet, or is the West controlling everything and Zionism is one of their puppets? Okay, so different people within this movement might answer differently, but the idea is that there is a global order, and we need to dismantle it completely, right? And anything that is not Islamic is one of their tools. Is basically part of this colonial plan, right? So to achieve true independence, Muslims believed they had to fight every political, cultural, and intellectual legacy of the colonial powers, you know, including Hollywood or American music, or having a parliament, or equal rights for men and women, or secularism, anything that came from the West, basically. Concepts like the Caliphate were resurrected not just as historical models, but as potent symbols of a future free from Western hegemony, right? So let me see. We got a super chat here. Sean is saying, hence the need for Jewish, Christian, atheist unity. Yes, true, exactly, exactly, Shadow. That's fantastic. Or basically anybody who's not part of this Islamic agenda. Thank you. Honestly, they're anti-Muslim as well, because these Islamists consider any Muslim to not be in on this project to be an infidel, right? And part of the reason, this is why the main founders of Muslim Brotherhood considered that they need to be fighting Muslims before they fight, I mean, in their mind, so-called Muslims, before they start fighting the West. Because the Muslims in Islamic countries who are not fighting the West are the bigger problem right now in their mind. So we have thinkers and movements across the Muslim world linked the struggle for liberation directly to Islamic principles. According to scholar Vali Reza Nasr, a powerful paradigm was created by linking Islam with the anti-colonial struggle. Again, this was quite stretched, but they somehow managed to use metaphors to connect Islamic ideas to anti-colonialism, which is really a stretch because Islam is colonial itself. And said this intellectual and political fusion gave rise to influential movements and was championed by leading thinkers. Right? So you can see some of these movements. You can see, for example, Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood is one of these movements. You can see Iran's tobacco movement is in the list. Okay. And you can see the thinkers on the left. And then, yeah, so the struggle against colonialism created the dominant paradigm for the modern pan-Islamism. From this perspective, every form of political Islam, whether Islamism, pan-Islamism, or Caliphatism, is fundamentally an attempt to free Muslims from the legacies of colonialism. It is a continuing project of decolonization aimed at reclaiming sovereignty and reasserting a place in the world order on its own terms. The call for a revived ummah is not a retreat into the past, but a strategic claim on the future. So this is their perspective, and I think it's really good for. I know, by the way, that these types of stream, because they're more educational, they get less views. Okay, but I think that the people who show up to these types of stream that they do, because this is going to be a series of these videos. I think by the end of this series, you are going to be more well equipped to talk about these issues than vast majority of the people out there, because you could see how everything happened. You could speak their language, you could see their perspective, and you're going to be a lot more challenging to as somebody on our side that is resisting against their causes, right? So I think there's a lot of value in this. I do also want to make sure that I do a separate series that we talk about what we're defending. Okay. So these series that we're doing is a bit for us to better understand what we're defending against, what are we resisting, what is understand the enemy, right? But I want to do another series on Western classical liberal values, explaining them, so that we shouldn't just be talking about our enemy. We should also be talking about why is it worth protecting what we're protecting. Because I think a lot of people might not understand, like a lot of people might think that, okay, fine, they're coming for us, okay, but they're not that passionate about defending our values because they don't understand our values. So I'm gonna do two series, one on politics in Islam, but also another one on Western politics and Western values, Enlightenment values, classical liberal values, the modern Republican tradition, the nation state model. So let me know if you want me to do that as well, because I know those will get even less views than this one, but I really think we need to understand what it is that we're defending, so that some of us at least become more passionate about defending them. We get more motivation about defending them. Yeah, Amir saying yes, please. Or I mean, yeah, okay, yes. But let me know if you think that for the people who do want to see me do those other series, let me know if you want me to finish these political Islam series first and then do those, or do them one like in between, like do one Islam and then one Western and then one Islam and one Western. Should I do them both together or finish one and then do the other one? Let me know which one you prefer. Maybe after the stream is over, leave a comment. Yeah. Do political Islam. Trail mix said do political Islam first. Okay. More about the difference between Shias. I know very little. Okay. Yeah, we will get to the how, because everything we're talking about right now is a Sunni version, right? But I will tell you how all of this eventually made it to. This is way before the Islamic Revolution in Iran, right? So everything we're talking about politics in Islam right now is Sunni, right? But eventually, all of this makes its way into Iran and becomes Shia and causes the Islamic Revolution of 1979. So I will show you how that happened. I'll show how we get to from Muslim Brotherhood to the guardianship of the jurist version of 12er Shia Islam, and basically what we refer to as Khomeinism. So we will show you how that bridge was made at some point, which is very actually interesting. This connection was made by one man. Anyone knows who that one man is that made that bridge between the Shias in Islam in Iran and the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood? Anybody knows the name of the man that made this connection and made all of this possible? Anybody know? Anybody know? No. No. Khomeini came a lot after. Khomeini's movement came after. I give you a hint. His first name is like my last name. What do you mean Ali? Which Ali? Oh, thank you. Okay, let me read the super chat to see if anybody could guess. Carl is saying very insightful. Thank you. Prefer it over the Rage Beatty stuff. Look forward to both series. Okay. Well, guys, I need to do those, Carl. I need those types of titles so that more people come and discover these. But thank you for the praise. So no, nobody knows the guy's name. Yeah, okay, you're saying I know. Okay. All right, so his name is Navab Safavi. Navab Safavi, which is a very important figure that we will get to at some point. Navab Safavi. All right, guys. So this is it. I'm going to go get ready for our group discussion. In our discussion group, link is in the description. So yeah, our discussion group is going to happen in 45 minutes. So yeah, I'll see you guys there. Looking forward to hearing what you guys are talking about today in our discussion group. And never heard of him before? Okay. Thank you, Armin. Oh, thank you, Armin. Hope everyone has a good day. Amazra Khai, Javid Shah. Oh, thank you, Neil Bunny. All right, guys. Yes. Amazra Khai, Javid Shah. See you guys on the next stream. Mwah. Don't forget to like.